Greetings and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our podcast aims to provide distinctive perspectives and concepts for building leadership capacity to meet the challenges of a volatile and uncertain future. I am Dr. John Dentico, your host. If you are keenly interested in the intense competition for skilled professionals, distinguishing between leadership and management, and the ongoing discourse regarding hybrid work teams, I am confident that my conversation with Mr. Michael Millward from the United Kingdom will be informative and illuminating. So let's get started. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hey, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast, a podcast designed to offer unique insights and ideas focused on leadership training for a volatile and uncertain future. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. Today marks a turning point in the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast because in addition to the solo episodes produced, I am incorporating interviews with experts and thought leaders in a range of fields whose perspectives you will find eye-opening and thought-provoking. I am pleased and honored to have as my first guest Mr. Michael Millward from the United Kingdom. Michael Millward, MSc, FCIPD, is the founder of UK-based Ambassador.co.uk, a multidisciplined HR technology and HR services company. During his lengthy HR career, Michael has worked across numerous sectors, including the public sector, manufacturing, and high tech in every size of business, from multinational conglomerates to startups in Europe, the Middle East, North America, Africa, and Asia. Michael has a master's from the University of Wales and is a chartered fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development. Michael produces learning resources for BookBoon, including the Ambassador Quotation Conversations, webinars, and audiobooks. He also hosts the Independent Minds podcast. I will leave a link in the episode to Michael Ambassador.co.uk, as well as his LinkedIn account, Ambassador Michael Millward. Hello, Michael, and how are you today?
Hello, John. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very well, thank you, and hope that you can say the same.
I can, and it's great to be with you here today.
Thank
Michael,
you very much for inviting me to be your first guest. It's quite a privilege. Thank you very much.
You are most welcome, and as I said, I'm so pleased and honored that you agreed to be here with me today. I appreciate it very much. Michael,
welcome.
as we had discussed previously, we wanted to concentrate on hiring and recruiting practices today. And I think to start off, what I'd like to do is just kind of review a couple of things. First, I'm sure you have seen the news briefs of the layoffs that are happening in big tech and across different industries in the United States. In addition to the inflation issues and problems that are facing, I'm sure, us as well as folks in the United Kingdom. And of course, the debate rages on about whether or not we are in a recession or entering a recession and how big or how long that recession might be. It would seem, to me anyway, counterintuitive that talent wars still are ongoing. So tell me, Michael, in the UK, are talent wars still an issue for organizations and companies in the UK?
Now, I'm going to answer that question by asking a question. The question is, when do you think the talent wars started?
Well, that's a great question. I can tell you that from my own experience, it's been a while.
It's very long while.
It's been a very long while. In fact, I can't remember right now when in a past period here in the United States, when there wasn't a talent war, to be honest about it.
This is true. First talent wars started in 1346. 1346 to 1353, there was a pandemic. The Black Death ravaged Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. Millions of people died. Prior to the Black Death, people lived and worked within the same community their whole lives. This was the farm that my grandfather worked on, my great-grandfather, all these sorts of things. People worked in a completely different way. When the Black Death came along, millions of people died. The population is decimated. There are lots of big estates, noble gentry, aristocrats, all had land that they needed to have farmers working on, the peasants working on. And it then became an idea that like, okay, well, I'll take some of the peasants from over there. I'll encourage them to come onto my land rather than staying where they've been for generations. This is the first movement of workers around the world, although they didn't probably move very far. But that's the first sort of time of a talent war or a war for talent. The terminology came into general usage back in 1997 when there was a report from McKinsey which highlighted that there were labor shortages. There was a lack of people with the talents that organizations needed as they were moving from mechanical type of industries into a more technical industries. And we're still in that at the moment. We still are not getting the right type of people coming out of all levels of education with the right type of skills, knowledge, and attitudes and attributes for the jobs that are available. So people struggle to find new entrants. We've also in the UK gone through a situation where it's no longer as easy as it used to be to import people from Europe and other parts of the world. So we've lost out on immigrants coming into the country as well. We've also losing out because people are leaving the United Kingdom and moving to the places they've always moved to, like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States. But we're also seeing the children of previous generations of immigration moving back to the countries where their parents and grandparents came from. So countries in the West Indies, countries in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, all sorts of different places. India, people are moving back to because they can enjoy a great lifestyle and a great career in those countries nowadays. So we're losing people at all sorts of different levels of the workforce. We're losing people from the senior levels as well. People during the pandemic found out that they could work from home, that they enjoyed working from home, that they enjoyed the lifestyle of working from home, and didn't feel the need to go back to the office, to go back into the maelstrom and the melodrama of the working day, and have decided to take early retirement or are working part-time. So we're losing people from the entry level, we're losing people from the middle levels, and we're also losing our leavers. We're also losing our leaders, our senior employees as well.
Very interesting. So, Michael, it's very interesting when you look back into history to see when the talent wars really began. But what does that mean for us today? What does it mean for employers and the people today as the talent wars rage on?
Interesting. And there are lots of questions associated with that. Some we know the answers to, some we don't know the answers to. But the important thing is to remember that the war is ongoing, but the battlefields have changed and the weapons have changed. And we need to not think that we have to reinvent the wheel, but look back to the solutions that were derived to meet previous generations of wars for talents, other battles that were fought, and try and work out how we can use the lessons from those experiences to meet with the situations that we have today. The important thing I think that we need to look at, though, is how the battlefield has changed, how we have more businesses that have technology and more technology focused rather than mechanically focused that may have been the sort of situation at this point in the last century. We still had lots of factories with lots of people going to work in the same place, producing goods. That has now moved around the world, and there's an awful lot of automation in manufacturing as well. So if you think about the United States, think about Canada, think about Europe, what sort of situations have we got there? And we've got lots more technology. We've got much more understanding of leisure. We've just seen a successful campaign in the UK for the 4-day week, and how many organizations who tried it for a year have said, it's good, we're going to keep it. And how people themselves, individuals, have said, this works wonders for me. So if we think about what has happened in terms of education. We have people who have higher levels of education. We have higher levels of skills. We don't necessarily always have the right skills in the right places, but is that important when we can, if I'm in the United Kingdom, you're in the United States, and we're having a conversation, technology opens up all sorts of opportunities. We have to think about looking at how people want to live today, and then also think about how technology and the way in which we employ them enables them to do that. So if we look back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the last century, we could see people were very career orientated. They wanted their own house, they wanted their own car, they wanted to go on foreign holidays, and they were prepared to sacrifice various different things in order to earn the money, in order to be able to achieve those sorts of things. Nowadays, people are more likely to be thinking, I want this lifestyle. How do I find a job that enables me to have that lifestyle? There's been a switch, and more employers need to think about how that switch happens.
I mean, the messages and information that comes across my desk every day is replete with the notion of hybrid teams, of people not wanting to go back to work in a brick and mortar place, for example. They want time for childcare at home, elder care as well. Having faced that difficult task in my life, it can be all consuming. So the question is at least from one famed author's perspective, from Gladwell, who recently said that in order for people to feel a sense of belonging, and that seems to be a theme that's risen up across the spectrum, if you will, of organizations and companies, that people want to have a sense of belonging. And his quote was much along the lines that if you want to have a sense of belonging, you need to return to the brick and mortar place where you had normally done work. Do you agree with that, Michael? Do you think a sense of belonging can be achieved online?
Yes, I do. I think that I wouldn't disagree with Mr. Gladwell. There's nothing wrong with what he said, and in some situations, that would be an accurate way of describing what is necessary. It all depends upon the individual employees, the organization, and what it is that they do in some ways. Sometimes people do need to be together. But I'm also remembering there is a book called Images of Organizations by Gareth Morgan. And in that book, he says that we will reach a time when workers have less in common with the person who works in the same place as them, the same bricks and mortar. The person doing a different job in the same bricks and mortar location, they will have less in common with those people than they have with people doing the same job on the other side of the world. And I think we're already seeing that happen. If we look at the high-tech sector in particular, because they're more adept at it, they're using it all the day, is that people who, when they want an answer to a question, when they need to learn something, will go to a forum and find that answer. And that person who provides the answer could be anywhere in the world. It's just somebody that they trust in that forum to provide the answer. They trust that forum. They belong to that forum. They belong to that group of people. There is credibility on being part of that group, and that adds something to how they do their jobs. You can also see online that there are lots of organizations, lots of individuals who have built communities which have then delivered very nice incomes for those people. You only have to look at Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, people who have built communities of like-minded individuals who all have a sense of belonging to that community, who are then sharing information, helping one another, spending money. It is possible to build a community and a sense of belonging online. It just depends whether it's right for the organization, or the processes that they're following, the type of customers that they have. And each individual, each organization, each market is going to be different, but we shouldn't. So it's not a black and white. We shouldn't be saying you can only do it this way or you can only do it that way. It depends upon what is required, and we have to be nowadays much more open-minded, I think, about these things than we ever were in the past.
You make a very, very valid point. I think that, again, you just have to look at the social media outlets, the YouTubes, the Rumbles, if you will, the locals that we have here, and you can see that people have built immense followings, immense subscribers to their channels that are paying them significant amounts of money for advertising revenue and the ability to reach out to people with specific products, for example, and services as well. I have a
Yeah.
question.
No, I was just going to say this whole community thing is people coming together, but they always come together around an individual, a brand, a message. There is some form of leadership that happens in order to create that online community. It is not something that has no form, no structure. There is leadership within that community. The bricks and mortar environment is much more about management. It's about, you will be here at this particular time and you will do these types of activities for a period of time and you will finish at a period of time. It is much more about management and having people in one place. It's much more about leadership when you can't actually see or touch those person face to face or actually be in the same space as them. You'd be in a technical space. But I think we're moving to a culture which is much more about leadership and values and having a value proposition, which means people buy into that. And it becomes much more about values and leadership rather than management control. We're in a transition stage, I think, is what is important.
I agree. I think there are two other things that are at work here, and I'll just mention them. One is freedom.
Yes.
People have the freedom to associate with, to subscribe to whatever channel interests them in an unbelievable, mind-boggling a choice of different kinds of channels offering so many different types of information and knowledge, from how to set up a studio for a YouTube, for a podcast, to anything else you can quite imagine. So I think freedom is something that people just gravitate to. And the second part of that, along with that, is what I observe as the tenets of democracy. People are free to choose which channel they wish to join or which channel they wish to leave. So for me, those two factors are resident in this idea of people growing online communities and becoming members of online communities that provide them what they consider to be valuable information and valuable knowledge. So let me take this to the next, if I could, let me take this to the next step, because I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about this idea now of moving from traditional, if you will, hierarchical leadership ideas and models to a much more distributed leadership perspective, a much more distributed notion of leadership amongst a group of people, let's say, for example, online. I used a term in my book called super networkers. And I think that's a term that shows that at any day, any given day, a person can get online and connect with other people in different parts of the world, in different senses of sharing information, and create this, if you will, networked approach to leadership. I'd like to hear your comments on what you think this portends for the traditional hierarchical leadership perspective.
I'm going to disagree with you to begin with, because I don't think the traditional hierarchical leadership is the best way to describe it. I think when we're talking about that, we're talking about traditional hierarchical management. And management, I think, is completely different to leadership. Management is something that is a role. It is a position, a title. It has powers, authority, rank about it. Right? Leaders, you don't need authority, position, power to be a leader. Anyone can be a leader. Yeah. And I think that's something that comes out in your book. Anyone can be a leader. Right? As an HR person, if you're managing a change management process and creating a change within an organization, there are almost three ways to do it. There is the, go to the managers and cascade it down from the top, very official. You can enforce it. You can say, this is what's going to happen, end of, no discussion. Or you can go to the person in the group of employees who doesn't have a management position, but they have influence. They're the leader. They're the person who, if they say something is good, something's all right, everybody else will gravitate towards agreeing with them because that person's innate natural leadership. It's not something that they sought, not something that they intended to take on, but it's just other people respect them and listen to them. They're leaders of groups. And I think that's what we're moving much more towards, is you could say self-led teams, teams electing their own leaders, teams who are identifying the person in their group who is the one who's most naturally adept at leadership, and also the other types of team roles. And instead of trying to position people within prescribed activities that are around production or achieving an outcome, we'll much more move towards looking at competencies and attributes and defining what someone does at work based around what they're good at, what they enjoy doing, and thinking, how can we use that within our organization, and how can we lead those people so that they discover new ways of enhancing their natural abilities to be able to perform better for the organization.
I agree. I have characterized the difference between leadership and management at its base as the difference between management being efficient and leadership being effective. The ability to be more effective in the things that you do. And you need both, in my opinion. You do need a sense of efficiency, and you do need to be able to look at a problem and said, this thing is broken. I mean, it just doesn't work anymore. And we need to, my famous one line is, you need to take out a clean piece of paper and start all over again and redo this. Take a different viewpoint from this. It also, I have to say, agrees with my notion that leadership to me is a set of actions, practices. One of my other lines that I love to call on is that there's a difference between being a leader, the hierarchy, having the job, and actually being able to engage in leadership practices and actions. We see this all
Yes.
the time. We see it all the
Mhm.
time. There are people who have the job. They've been given the opportunity to have the authority. And we put them in that job, and we say, okay, you're the leader, let's make it happen. And they have a very difficult time in taking the knowledge that they've gained, the training, the traditional training that they've got, and now push that into action and practice, whereby things in an organization get better.
That's
So,
true.
that to me has always been a problem. In fact, one of the themes in my book has always been the book was written for 80% of the people who don't think they are leaders, but but can be leaders if they choose to take up the challenge and become and engage in leadership practices. So for me that is a very critical point that you point to.
Yes.
Um,
I think
Go ahead.
one of the things that you mentioned there was that people become leaders and they have a very difficult time, and because they've got the role, right? They're given the role of leadership and they have a very difficult time. And part of it, I think, is that anyone can manage. You can learn the various different skills, the processes of being a manager. And you will have a difficult time unless you also lead the people. And one of the tests of being a leader of the people, I suppose, is that when the chips are down, when the times are tough, if you are a leader, the people that you are leading will support you and be there for you and help you get through it because they're on your team. You're all part of the same group who are focusing on a common goal, common objectives, and you know what you're going. If you are a manager, you'll never be quite sure whether the people that report to you, not the people you're leading, because you're not leading them, you're controlling them, you're managing them, they report to you. But if you're a manager instead of a leader, you'll never actually be 100% confident that if the chips are down, if times are tough, that those people will support you because you're a manager and not a leader. And I think one of the things comes out in your book is that you explain this in quite a lot of detail in a very accessible way, but you explain this whole sort of process of the way in which mindsets need to change and how it then becomes activities that people can take, which are the difference between management and leadership.
Right. I've mentioned to you before that one of the basic lessons I learned as a very, very young naval officer was that if you take care of your
Mhm.
people will take care of you. And I have never been disappointed in sticking to that.
Yes, I
That
remember you telling me that story. I do remember you telling me that story, and it brought to mind the Richard Gere character. You reminded me of Richard Gere when you told me that story. And in that film, The Officer and a Gentleman, how he arrives as this very overconfident character who's perfect at everything and knows all of the different scams. And by the end of it, at the end of the film, he's learned how to be a leader. When they all have to do the assault course, he goes through the assault course, comes out on top. But instead of sitting there at the end of it, because he's learned how to be a leader, he goes back over the course and encourages everyone else over the obstacles because he's learned how to lead people as part of that process.
Yeah, it's a great film that demonstrates the change
Yeah.
from being an independent, I don't need anybody else, I can do it all myself, to really being a team player and to being in the end a true naval officer that cares about his people and is willing, and here's something that I use, who's willing to fight for his people.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Sometimes you can say to a group, your team, listen, I want you to do this. I think this is a good idea. And they all agree, say, yeah, that is a good idea. And all of a sudden you get, again, the manager, the superior coming down and trying to kibosh it. No, that's not the way we do business. No. Now, there's two choices the leader has. One is you just fold up your tent and you just, sit there and say, yeah, boss, you're right. We'll do it your way. Or since you are the one who kind of got this going and it's your kind of idea of how things should be done, you can stand there and take them on and fight not only for your ideas, but protect and fight for your people. And I have seen close up and personal people fold their tents more than stand and fight for the people that work for them. And it is a very disheartening kind of thing. There's a difference between this quote. There's a difference between doing things right and doing the right thing. And there's sometimes that you have to make that cut because really, when you talk about people, one of the most influential, perhaps the most powerful force that a leader can engage his folks with is mutual trust. Mutual trust is the fuel that runs any organization.
Okay. Yes, I agree with you, John. I do. I think that looking back over my career, I can say that I've been managed never particularly well in lots of jobs, but I've only ever been led once. And that was by someone who I think, when I compare him to the other managers, he was someone who cared, genuinely cared about me, about the work that I did, and how it contributed to the lifestyle that I wanted to lead, and also cared about my colleagues and made sure that no one was ever in a position where they had to do something which they really did not want to do. But he understood us as individuals, understood us as a team, understood what we liked about each other, what we didn't like about each other, and was really adept at managing those relationships in a way that made us, well, for me, it was never a case of I won't do it. It was like, how quickly do you want it done? I'll do it. I cared about my leader as much as he cared about me. And that, I think, is one of the things that many people now look for in a leader, that they don't just want to be cared about, they want a leader that they can care about themselves as well. It's much more of a relationship-based relationship, if that's a correct way to describe it, I suppose. A relationship that is much more of a relationship. Whereas management is much more about authority, control, and all these sorts of things. People as managers, want to be respected. People as leaders want to be trusted.
I agree. And, the beginning of my definition of leadership is that leadership is an influence relationship that engenders safety, trust, and commitment. That's just the
Mm.
front piece. And I agree. Again, this is all about people wanting to be in an organization, wanting to be with a leader they can trust, no matter how difficult the going may get. So I agree completely.
I mean,
Influence
picking up
relationship.
on what you've just said about wanting to be in an organization, wanting to be associated with it, be part of the community, build a sense of belonging. It doesn't matter whether you are in a bricks and mortar place or a virtual place. The things that I think about when I think about belonging is, are people prepared to wear the sweatshirt, the t-shirt, the polo shirt with the company brand on? They'll wear them to the company events, but will you then see them in photographs on their social media wearing the brand, saying that I work here? You can't get this polo shirt unless you work here, right? That's why I'm wearing it, because I work there. I'm associated with that organization. I'm proud to wear this logo, right? Because I work there. It's not just something that you do because you go to work and wear it. You wear it outside. You've got the pen, you've got the bag, you've got all the various different branded items, just in the same way as a teenager will have their favorite rock group on a t-shirt. Adults, people who work, can build that same type of relationship with those types of garments. People wear the company brand outside of work. That shows they're committed. They've got a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and it doesn't matter where they work. People are proud of it. I think that's very important.
I agree. That's very important. I wanted to touch on one other piece before we wrap it up today, and that is the power of the informal lines of communication. Now, this
Yeah.
this kind of goes back to your comparison,
Mm.
difference between leadership and management, having the authority, filling the position, having the line, if you will, drawn out on the org chart, as opposed to people understanding who they need to contact on a daily basis to keep the organization whole, to keep things moving forward. Who's on their iPhone list of contacts to call whenever things get difficult. I'd like you to maybe comment on your observation on the power of the informal lines of communication.
Yes, I think that it's very easy to believe that because you're in a position of authority, if you say something is going to happen, it's going to happen. It needs to be done by people, and people are how you get things done. And the informal lines of communication, I think, people talk about silos, and that you have to go up the silo in order to then go down the next silo. And you mustn't talk to so-and-so unless you've spoken to the person way above them, all this sort of stuff and all this sort of thing. And I've worked in Asia and a very hierarchical silo type organizations where the formal structures were very formal and very controlled. But everybody really knew that, the way to get things done wasn't necessarily to go up the communication chart across and then down again. It was very often that you spoke to your secretary, who spoke to somebody else's secretary, who spoke to somebody else's secretary, and things started to happen. Because those informal, it wasn't the hierarchy, it was groups of people who knew one another, knew that by making things happen, they'd make their jobs easier and they'd make everybody else's jobs easier, and it'd be better for the organization as well. Yeah. You don't always have to go up in order to go across and down. Sometimes the best person to do the communication around the organization is nowhere near the top of the department. They're the people underneath, but they know somebody and they get on well with that person and they have lunch with that person or they went to school with that person. And you've got to find those relationships and not use them as such in any negative way, but you've got to foster the networks that exist within the organizations. Because if we go back to what Mr. Gladwell said, then he talks about you have to be in a bricks and mortar place to get a sense of belonging, right? And yes, you can, but unless you build those networks within the bricks and mortar place, you won't actually get that sense of belonging because you'll still be very isolated within your silo. One of the things I noticed during the lockdown was when lots of professional association events went online, I was meeting more people because we were being one of these conversations and we go off into a room and, I wouldn't necessarily, if I'd been in a physical event, actually had the opportunity to meet those people. So if we learn how to use the technology to create the networks, to create the sense of belonging, to enable and facilitate people to take on leadership activities as well as leadership roles, and I think people can understand more about the difference between those when they've read your book, then you will get better senses of belonging within a hybrid world where people know why they're going into the bricks and mortar, and they will have better purposes and better activities and get better value from the face-to-face connections that they make, as well as from the online connections that they make.
You could say that the administrative personnel in an organization are the original super networkers.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Anyway, listen, Michael, thank you so very, very much for agreeing to be with me this morning in my inaugural interview type podcast. I appreciate it so much. I'm sure the folks who will view this and listen to it will learn a lot and find the information incredibly thought-provoking. So I want
Well,
to
John,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, well, John, I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. It's really nice to be asked, but I have to say that every time I have a conversation with you, I learn something new. Thank you very much.
And I feel the same exact way. So listen, Michael, thank you so very much for your time. Have a wonderful day and cheers.
Thank you.
I trust that you found the interview with Mr. Michael Millward from the United Kingdom informative and enlightening. Thank you for tuning in to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. This is Dr. John Dentico wishing you success as you put leadership into practice to face the challenges of a volatile and uncertain future. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.